My name is Daniela, and I'm 28 years old. Standing here in the obstetrics clinic, my hands trembling as I hold the ultrasound results, showing the tiny 8-week-old life growing inside me. Tears stream down my face as I stare at this miracle, yet my heart feels completely shattered. Just 3 days ago, Marcus, the man I was supposed to marry next week, left me for my younger sister Emma. I kept silent about the pregnancy, terrified he'd think I was trying to trap him. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever faced betrayal from those closest to you, please subscribe and like this video. 3 years ago, I met Marcus at an art exhibition in Seattle. The gallery was showcasing local emerging artists, and I'd gone there alone on a rainy Thursday evening after finishing my classes at Jefferson Elementary, where I taught third-grade art. Marcus stood transfixed before a painting of the Seattle skyline rendered in watercolors, and when he noticed me watching him, he smiled and asked if I was the artist. I laughed and told him no, I just taught little kids how to finger paint, but something about his genuine interest made me stay and talk with him for 2 hours that night. Marcus was a talented architect working for one of the city's most prestigious firms. His passion for design matched my love for art, and we spent our early dates walking through the city as he explained the stories behind buildings, while I sketched quick portraits of strangers in my notebook. Within 6 months, we were spending every evening together in his apartment, me grading art projects while he worked on blueprints, occasionally showing each other our work and offering suggestions. He designed furniture pieces just for fun, and I'd paint murals on his walls, turning his sterile bachelor pad into something warm and lived in. My younger sister Emma, just 2 years younger than me at 26, had always been my closest friend. She worked as a nurse at Swedish Medical Center, often pulling 12-hour shifts that left her exhausted but fulfilled. Growing up, we'd shared everything from clothes to secrets to dreams about our futures. When I introduced her to Marcus at our 6-month anniversary dinner, she hugged him immediately and declared he was perfect for me. She became a constant presence in our lives, joining us for Sunday brunches and helping us paint the kitchen when Marcus and I moved in together after a year of dating. The proposal came on our 2-year anniversary. Marcus had secretly worked with my students to create an elaborate treasure hunt through the school, ending in the art room where he'd recreated our first meeting at the gallery, complete with printed reproductions of the same paintings. When I walked in to find him on one knee, 25 third graders giggling behind easels, I said yes, before he even asked the question. The ring was perfect, a vintage Art Deco piece he'd found at an estate sale and had restored, knowing I preferred meaningful over expensive. Wedding planning consumed the next year. Emma threw herself into helping creating spreadsheets for vendors, taste testing cakes with us, and spending countless hours looking at flower arrangements. Our parents were thrilled, already referring to Marcus as their son and discussing future grandchildren at every opportunity. We booked the Fairmont Olympic Hotel's Spanish ballroom for the reception, sent out 150 invitations with hand-painted watercolor details I'd spent weeks perfecting, and Emma found the most beautiful bridesmaid dress in a soft sage green that complemented her complexion perfectly. 2 weeks before the wedding, I started feeling nauseous in the mornings. At first, I attributed it to wedding stress, but when the feeling persisted, I bought a pregnancy test on my lunch break. Sitting on the bathroom floor of the school's faculty restroom, watching those 2 pink lines appear, I felt overwhelming joy mixed with nervous excitement. I decided to wait until after our honeymoon in Hawaii to tell Marcus, imagining his face when I'd present him with a tiny pair of baby shoes on the beach at sunset. My work at Jefferson Elementary had always been more than just a job. The children brought me such joy with their uninhibited creativity and honest perspectives on the world. Marcus had recently won a major project designing a new children's hospital wing, and we'd spent evenings discussing how the space could incorporate art therapy rooms. He'd even started sketching ideas for a nursery, though we hadn't officially started trying yet, saying he wanted practice for when the time came. Emma's visits became more frequent as the wedding approached. She'd arrive after her hospital shifts, still in her scrubs, carrying wedding magazines or fabric samples. She and Marcus developed an easy friendship, texting about surprise wedding gifts for me and conspiring to keep me from getting too stressed. I loved seeing them get along so well, feeling blessed that my future husband and sister were becoming genuine friends. Looking back, there were signs I missed entirely. Emma started dressing differently when she knew Marcus would be around, trading her usual casual clothes for fitted dresses and carefully applied makeup. Marcus began mentioning things Emma had said during conversations I hadn't been part of, inside jokes I didn't understand. When Emma offered to help Marcus pick out his wedding day cufflinks and watch, because I was too busy with parent-teacher conferences, I thought nothing of it, grateful for her support. 1 week before our wedding, Emma suggested she accompany Marcus to make the final payment on our wedding rings. She reasoned that I was overwhelmed with wrapping up the school year and finishing report cards, and someone should go with him to ensure everything was perfect. They left at 10 in the morning on a Saturday, promising to be back by lunch. When 3 o'clock came and went with no word, I texted Marcus asking if everything was okay. His response was brief, saying they'd decided to grab lunch and run a few other wedding errands. They returned after 6 that evening with a strange energy between them. Marcus avoided my eyes as he kissed my cheek, mumbling about traffic and crowded stores. Emma seemed flustered, her cheeks flushed as she quickly gathered her things and left despite my invitation to stay for dinner. That night, Marcus was distant, scrolling through his phone while I tried to discuss our honeymoon itinerary. When I asked to see the rings, he said the jeweler was doing final polishing and they'd be ready in 2 days. The following days brought more changes. Marcus started working late, claiming he needed to finish projects before taking time off for the wedding and honeymoon. He'd come home after I was in bed, slipping in quietly and falling asleep without our usual goodnight conversation. When I brought him lunch at his office on Tuesday, his assistant mentioned he'd been leaving early most days, which confused me since he'd been coming home so late. Emma transformed seemingly overnight. Her usual ponytails and minimal makeup gave way to perfectly styled hair and sophisticated outfits. When she stopped by Wednesday evening to go over the reception seating chart, she wore a dress I'd never seen before, deep blue and form-fitting with heels that made her legs look endless. Marcus came home while she was there, and I caught him staring at her as she bent over the dining table to point out where our cousins should sit. Thursday's family dinner at my parents' house should have been a celebration. My mother had prepared all our favorite dishes, and my father made a toast to the upcoming union of our families. But throughout the meal, I noticed Marcus and Emma exchanging glances across the table. When Emma laughed at something our dad said, Marcus watched her with an expression I'd only seen him direct at beautiful buildings or particularly moving pieces of art. My stomach churned and I excused myself to the bathroom, where I dry heaved over the toilet, telling myself it was just morning sickness extending into the evening. That night I tried to be intimate with Marcus, hoping to reconnect before our wedding. He pulled away, saying he was exhausted and stressed about work. As he turned his back to me in bed, I placed my hand on my still flat stomach, finding comfort in the secret growing inside me. I told myself everything would be better after the wedding, that pre-wedding jitters were normal for everyone involved. Emma called Friday morning asking if I needed help with anything. Her voice sounded strained, and when I mentioned I was feeling under the weather, she became overly concerned, asking multiple questions about my symptoms. I assured her it was just stress, though the nausea had been particularly bad that morning. She offered to bring me ginger tea and crackers, but I declined, saying I needed to focus on grading final art projects. Marcus didn't come home at all Friday night. His text said he was going out with his groomsmen for an impromptu bachelor party, though we'd specifically agreed not to have separate parties the night before the wedding. I tried calling him around midnight, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Unable to sleep, I scrolled through Instagram, trying to distract myself from the growing unease in my chest. At 2 in the morning, I saw it. Marcus's friend Trevor had posted a story from a bar downtown. In the background of the video, I could clearly see Marcus at a table, and next to him, partially hidden but unmistakable, was Emma's sage green bridesmaid dress. My hands shook as I replayed the story, telling myself I was seeing things, that it could be anyone in a similar dress. But I knew my sister's laugh audible in the background, and I knew the way Marcus tilted his head when he was really listening to someone. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in our living room, surrounded by wedding gifts and boxes of decorations for the reception, trying to make sense of what I was feeling. Part of me wanted to drive to Emma's apartment immediately, but another part was terrified of what I might find. I convinced myself to wait until morning to give them the benefit of the doubt, to believe in the love and trust we'd built over years. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. I'd finally dozed off on the couch around 5, waking at 7 with a stiff neck and the immediate return of nausea. After managing to keep down some toast, I decided to visit Emma's apartment. We'd planned to get ready together for the rehearsal dinner that evening, and I told myself I was simply arriving early. The 10-minute drive felt like hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I practiced what I'd say. Marcus's blue Honda Accord was parked outside Emma's apartment building. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sat in my car for 10 minutes watching the rain streak down my windshield, trying to construct innocent explanations. Maybe his car had broken down. Maybe he'd been too drunk to drive home and crashed there. Maybe Emma had called him to help with something urgent. My hand instinctively moved to my stomach, a protective gesture I'd developed over the past 2 weeks. I used the spare key Emma had given me months ago for emergencies. The hallway was silent as I approached her door, my footsteps muffled by the worn carpet. Standing outside apartment 4B, I pressed my ear against the door, hearing nothing but the blood rushing through my ears. My hand trembled as I inserted the key, turning it slowly to minimize noise. The door opened to reveal a scene that shattered my world into irreparable pieces. Clothes created a trail from the entrance to the bedroom. Marcus's distinctive brown leather jacket, the one I'd bought him for his birthday, lay crumpled near the door. Emma's heels, the new ones she'd worn to dinner, were kicked off haphazardly. A wine bottle sat empty on the coffee table beside 2 glasses, one still bearing the lipstick marks of Emma's favorite shade. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar, and through it I heard the sound of running water. Marcus emerged from the bedroom, wearing only his boxers, his hair disheveled in a way I knew intimately. He froze when he saw me, his face cycling through surprise, guilt, and something that looked almost like relief. For a moment we stood there in silence, the reality of the situation making words impossible. Then Emma appeared behind him, wrapped in the robe Marcus had given me last Christmas, her wet hair indicating she'd just showered. The silence stretched until Emma broke it with a whispered, "Oh God." She clutched the robe tighter, as if modesty mattered now. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he always made when facing difficult blueprints at work. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand explanations, but my voice remained trapped in my throat. All I could do was stand there, one hand pressed against my stomach, protecting the secret that suddenly felt like my only solid ground. Marcus spoke first, his architect's mind apparently needing to construct some framework for this disaster. He said he couldn't continue living a lie, that he needed to be honest before we made a mistake. The words came out practiced, as if he'd rehearsed them, and I realized with sickening clarity that he had. This wasn't a drunken accident or a moment of weakness. This was planned, decided, chosen. Emma started crying, mascara from yesterday running down her cheeks, as she babbled about not meaning for this to happen, about fighting the feelings, about how sorry she was. But even through her tears, I saw the way she moved closer to Marcus, how his hand automatically reached for hers. They were already a unit, already choosing each other over me, and I was simply an obstacle to be managed. Marcus delivered the killing blow with surgical precision. He said what we had was comfortable, safe, but not passionate. He said he'd realized he'd proposed out of expectation rather than desire. He said he loved me, but wasn't in love with me, that classic breakup line that means nothing and everything simultaneously. Then he looked at Emma with an expression I recognized, the one I thought was reserved for me, and said they were real, they were destiny. Emma wiped her tears and tried to touch my shoulder, but I stepped back. She said I deserved someone better, someone who loved me completely. She said Marcus had tried to deny his feelings, that they both had, but love wasn't something you could control. She actually used the word soulmates, as if that justified destroying everything we'd built, everything we were about to promise each other in front of everyone we loved. The urge to tell them about the pregnancy rose in my throat like bile. I could see it playing out, the shock on their faces, the guilt that would trap Marcus into staying, the resentment that would poison everything. My child would become a pawn in this terrible game, a source of obligation rather than joy. So I swallowed the words, locked them away with the rest of my screams, and turned to leave. Marcus called after me saying we needed to talk about the wedding, about what to tell people. The practical concerns of a man who'd already moved on, already planning his future without me. I didn't respond, didn't trust myself to speak without revealing everything. Emma sobbed louder, whether from genuine remorse or self-pity. I couldn't tell and didn't care. I walked out, leaving the door open behind me, leaving them to their destiny. The drive home was autopilot. I parked, somehow climbed the stairs to our apartment now, just my apartment, and stood in the middle of what was supposed to be our beginning. The wedding dress hung on the closet door, pristine and patient. The favors we'd assembled last weekend covered the dining table, 150 small boxes of locally made chocolates, with our initials intertwined. The walls displayed our engagement photos, Marcus and me laughing, kissing, looking at each other with what I'd believed was forever. I called the venue first, my voice surprisingly steady as I explained there would be no wedding. The coordinator was professionally sympathetic, informing me about the cancellation policy, the forfeited deposit. Next came the florist, the caterer, the photographer, the string quartet. With each call, I felt myself separating from the woman who'd chosen those vendors, who'd cared about peonies versus roses, who'd believed in happily ever after. By the time I finished, 3 hours had passed, and 150 guests needed to be informed. My parents arrived an hour after I called them, my mother still in her gardening clothes, dirt under her fingernails from planting flowers she'd planned to use as centerpieces. My father's face was stone as I explained what had happened, his jaw clenching when I mentioned Emma's role. My mother cried, but her tears seemed as much for Emma as for me, lamenting how love could make people do terrible things, how Emma was young and confused. When she suggested that perhaps in time we could all move past this, that family was more important than anything, I felt something inside me break beyond repair. The next morning brought a barrage of messages. Marcus sent paragraphs about being sorry for how things happened, but not for following his heart. He mentioned practical matters like his belongings, our shared bank accounts, the apartment lease, as if dissolving 3 years could be accomplished with a checklist. I didn't respond, focusing instead on packing his things into boxes with the kind of careful attention I'd once given to planning our future. Emma's attempts at contact were relentless. Text messages, voicemails, emails, all variations on the same theme of apology without accountability. She loved me, she insisted, but she loved Marcus too, and wasn't it better to know now rather than later? She actually asked if I could ever forgive her, if we could still be sisters, as if she hadn't just proven that blood meant nothing when weighed against desire. I deleted each message without response, though the words burned themselves into my memory. My father was my only ally, sitting with me in silence as I sorted through wedding gifts that would need to be returned. He didn't offer platitudes or false comfort, just his steady presence and occasional cups of tea. When he finally spoke, it was to say that some betrayals changed everything, that I had the right to handle this however I needed, that he would support whatever I decided. He was the only one who didn't try to minimize what had happened or rush me toward forgiveness. The pregnancy remained my secret, even as morning sickness made everyday functioning a challenge. I told my parents I had a stomach bug, stress-related, they assumed, and they didn't question it. Alone at night, I'd place both hands on my stomach and whisper to the tiny life inside, promising we'd be okay, that I'd be enough for both of us. The idea of raising a child alone terrified me, but not as much as the thought of Marcus staying out of obligation or using custody as a way to remain in my life. Work became my escape. The school year was ending, but I volunteered for summer school, needing the distraction and the income, now that I'd be managing everything alone. My principal, Mrs. Patterson, noticed something was wrong but respected my privacy, simply adjusting my schedule when I needed to leave for mysterious appointments that were actually prenatal checkups. The children's artwork, bright and uncomplicated, reminded me that beauty could still exist without betrayal. A week after everything fell apart, I made my decision. Portland had an opening for an art teacher at a progressive private school. The pay was better, the distance was enough, and they needed someone to start immediately for their summer program. I applied, interviewed via video call, and accepted the position within 3 days. The efficiency of escape surprised me how easily a life could be packed and transported when the reason to stay had evaporated. My mother cried when I told her, begging me to reconsider, to not let this drive me away from family. She said Emma was devastated that she'd made a terrible mistake, that Marcus wasn't worth losing both daughters. But she didn't understand that I hadn't just lost a fiancé and a sister. I'd lost the ability to trust in love's permanence, in family's loyalty, and my own judgment. Staying would mean watching them build what was supposed to be mine, and I refused to be a spectator to my own alternate life. The goodbye with my father was harder. He helped me load my car, insisting on checking the oil and tire pressure, giving me an envelope of cash I tried to refuse. He held me for a long moment, whispering that starting over took courage, that he was proud of me, that Emma and my mother would understand eventually. He was the only one I almost told about the pregnancy, but I held back, knowing he'd feel obligated to tell my mother, who'd tell Emma, and the cycle would begin again. My last night in Seattle, I drove past the gallery where I'd met Marcus. It had closed down, a for lease sign in the window, which felt appropriately symbolic. Then I went to the overlook at Cary Park, where Marcus had kissed me for the first time, as the city lights twinkled below. A couple stood there now, taking selfies wrapped in each other and possibility. I touched my stomach, thinking about the child who'd never know this view, this city, this version of what their life might have been. I left at 4 in this morning, wanting to avoid traffic and the chance of anyone trying to stop me. The roads were empty, the sky just beginning to lighten as I merged onto I-5 South. In the rearview mirror, Seattle shrank and disappeared, taking with it the woman who'd believed in forever, who'd trusted completely, who'd thought love meant choosing each other above all else. The woman driving toward Portland was someone new, someone harder, someone who understood that sometimes the only choice is to save yourself. Portland welcomed me with unexpected kindness. The apartment I'd hastily rented sight unseen turned out to be a converted loft in the Alberta Arts District, with large windows that filled the space with northern light, perfect for painting. The landlady, Mrs. Chen, lived downstairs and had left a basket of local coffee and pastries on my counter, with a note welcoming me to the neighborhood. That first night, surrounded by boxes and eating Thai takeout from a restaurant I'd randomly chosen, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. The Bridges Academy was everything Jefferson Elementary hadn't been. Progressive, well-funded, with small class sizes, and a philosophy that treated art as essential rather than extracurricular. My supervisor, Director Williams, gave me complete creative control over the summer program curriculum, trusting my experience without knowing my circumstances. The other teachers welcomed me warmly, especially Sarah, the music teacher whose classroom neighbored mine. Sarah became my first real friend in Portland without trying. She was 35, divorced, raising a 7-year-old daughter named Zoe alone while teaching full-time and playing violin in a community orchestra on weekends. She never asked why I'd moved so suddenly, or why I avoided talking about my past. Instead, she simply included me, inviting me to lunch, sharing teaching resources, complaining about administration in a way that made me laugh for the first time in weeks. By my 5th month of pregnancy, hiding became impossible. The flowing scarves and loose blazers that had concealed my growing belly through summer were failing against autumn's requirements. When I finally told Director Williams, trembling in her office while explaining I'd need maternity leave in winter, she surprised me by immediately discussing how they could support me. The school had excellent benefits, she explained, and they'd been hoping I'd stay beyond the temporary position. Within days, she'd arranged everything: insurance, leave coverage, even a modified schedule for when I returned. Sarah was the first person I told by choice rather than necessity. We were painting sets for the fall musical when I suddenly needed to sit the baby particularly active that day. She looked at my hand pressed to my side at my face and simply asked how far along I was. When I told her 6 months, she laughed and said she'd suspected for weeks, but figured I'd share when ready. That evening, she drove me to Target and helped me buy maternity clothes, treating it like a celebration rather than a crisis. The news from Seattle filtered through despite my attempts at isolation. My mother called one evening, her voice carefully neutral, to inform me that Emma and Marcus were officially together, that they'd been seen around town, that people were talking. She mentioned they'd moved in together into a new apartment neither had shared with me. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added that Emma was pregnant due in spring. Wasn't that wonderful? Wouldn't it be nice if cousins could grow up together? I hung up without responding and spent the night curled around my belly, crying for the first time since leaving. The baby kicked and rolled, seemingly disturbed by my distress, and I forced myself to calm down, to breathe, to remember that this little person needed me stable and strong. Sarah found me the next morning, still in yesterday's clothes, took one look at my face, and called us both in sick. She spent the day with me, not talking, just being there, teaching me through example how single motherhood could be managed with grace. The Portland autumn was different from Seattle's, crisper and brighter, with trees that turned brilliant red and gold, instead of simply fading to brown. I walked the neighborhood every evening, partly for exercise, and partly to learn my new home. The area was full of families, children playing in yards, parents pushing strollers, evidence that life could be built in infinite variations. I started recognizing faces, exchanging nods, building the smallest foundations of community. Work became my sanctuary. The children responded to my teaching with enthusiasm that reminded me why I'd chosen this profession. We created murals for the hallways, learned about artists from every culture, made gifts for the senior center nearby. When my students noticed my growing belly and asked questions, I answered simply that I was having a baby, and they accepted it with the straightforward logic of children. Some drew pictures for the baby, which I saved in a folder marked "Your First Art Collection." November brought unexpected challenges. The prenatal appointments I'd been managing alone became more complex as the due date approached. Decisions needed to be made about delivery, about who would be there, about what name would go on the birth certificate's father line. Sarah volunteered to be my birth partner without my asking, simply stating she'd be there when I needed her, and I cried in gratitude for friendship that expected nothing in return. I started painting again, really painting, not just teaching techniques to children. The loft's light was perfect in the early mornings, and I'd wake before dawn to capture something I couldn't name, abstract pieces full of movement and color that felt like conversations with my unborn child. A gallery owner from the neighborhood saw them when delivering a package to the wrong address, and before I knew it, she'd offered me a show for the following year after the baby came, when I was ready. December arrived with its particular kind of loneliness. The school's winter concert, where Sarah's students performed while mine displayed their artwork, showed me families gathering, couples holding hands, grandparents taking photos. I stood alone by my students' paintings, my hand on my 8-month belly, refusing to feel sorry for myself even as my throat tightened, watching the easy intimacy of intact families. 3 weeks before Christmas, I went into labor during a faculty meeting. The contractions had been coming all day, but I dismissed them as Braxton Hicks until my water broke mid-sentence while discussing spring semester plans. Sarah drove me to the hospital, running red lights, while I tried not to panic about being 3 weeks early. The next 16 hours were a blur of pain and pushing, of Sarah holding my hand and coaching me through breathing, of nurses who treated me with kindness, despite having no partner to advocate for me. Lily was born at 4:23 in the morning on December 20th, 6 pounds and 2 ounces of perfect fury, screaming her arrival with lungs that surely belonged to a larger child. When they placed her on my chest, still slippery and indignant, I felt my heart reconstruct itself around her, becoming something new and fierce and absolutely certain. Sarah took pictures with my phone, capturing those first moments when Lily opened her eyes and looked at me with an expression of ancient wisdom. The first months were exactly as hard as everyone warned, and nothing like what I'd expected. Lily had her days and nights reversed, cluster-fed constantly, and only slept when being held. I moved through those early weeks in a haze of exhaustion and wonder, learning her different cries, the way she preferred to be held, how she calmed when I sang off-key lullabies I half remembered from my own childhood. Sarah brought groceries, held Lily while I showered, reminded me that survival was the only goal. Returning to work after 12 weeks felt both too soon and like blessed relief. The school's daycare, one of the benefits that had attracted me, meant Lily was just down the hall. I could nurse her during lunch, check on her during planning periods, bring her to my classroom after hours while I prepped for the next day. My students were fascinated by her creating welcome back cards and paintings for her nursery, accepting her presence with the same ease they'd accepted my pregnancy. Spring came early to Portland that year, cherry blossoms exploding throughout the city in pink and white profusion. I pushed Lily's stroller through the neighborhood, pointing out colors and shapes, narrating the world to her in the way new parents do. She was 3 months old, and just beginning to smile with intention, her face a mixture of features that created someone entirely unique. Sometimes I searched for Marcus in her expressions, but found only Lily complete in herself. 5 years passed in a blur of first words and finger paintings, of sleepless nights and playground afternoons, of building a life that revolved around Lily, while slowly remembering who I was beyond motherhood. Portland became home in a way Seattle never quite had, perhaps, because I'd chosen it in crisis, and it had chosen me back, offering opportunity and anonymity in equal measure. Lily grew from a colicky infant into a brilliant artistic child who approached the world with curiosity and confidence that amazed me daily. The Bridges Academy promoted me to assistant director when Lily was 3, recognizing my work developing their arts integration program. The position came with a salary that finally allowed comfort instead of constant calculation, and we moved to a small house with a yard where Lily could paint outdoors and grow vegetables she refused to eat. I'd established myself as a serious artist too, showing work regularly at local galleries, selling enough pieces to start a college fund for Lily. Sarah remained my closest friend, our children growing up more like siblings than friends. Her daughter Zoe treated Lily like the little sister she'd always wanted, teaching her to ride a bike, protecting her from playground bullies, sharing the secret languages children create. Our small chosen family celebrated holidays together, creating traditions that belonged to no one's past, building something new and deliberately joyful. I'd had no contact with my Seattle life beyond obligatory holiday cards to my parents, with photos of Lily they never acknowledged. My mother occasionally left voicemails about family events I wasn't expected to attend, updates on Emma's children that I deleted without listening to completely. My father sent money on Lily's birthdays, always cash, always without a note, which I deposited into her college fund and tried not to read too much into. The gallery opening was my first solo show at a major Portland venue. Months of work had gone into preparing 25 pieces, exploring themes of transformation and resilience through abstract landscapes. The curator had insisted on a Friday evening opening complete with wine appetizers and live music from Sarah's quartet. I'd bought a new dress for the occasion, deep emerald green, that made me feel like an artist rather than a tired single mother. The gallery was packed by 7 o'clock red dots, appearing next to paintings as sales were made, strangers and friends offering congratulations. Lily wore her favorite purple dress and held court in the corner where I'd set up art supplies for children, teaching other kids her special technique for mixing colors. I was discussing a commission with a collector when Sarah grabbed my elbow, her face pale, tilting her head toward the entrance. Marcus stood in the doorway, older, thinner, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't hide his exhaustion. Beside him, Emma looked like a faded photocopy of herself holding a baby, while a boy around 4 tugged at Marcus's hand. They hadn't seen me yet, scanning the crowd, and I had a moment to decide whether to run or stand my ground. Then Lily's laugh rang out across the gallery, bright and unmistakable, and Marcus's head turned toward the sound like a compass finding north. The blood drained from his face as he watched Lily demonstrating her painting technique. Her gestures animated her profile, clearly visible. Even from across the room, I could see him doing the math, seeing what he'd missed, understanding what my silence had hidden. Emma followed his gaze, her hand flying to her mouth as she too recognized the implications. They stood frozen, blocking the doorway until other guests forced them to move further inside. I excused myself from the collector and walked toward them, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor with more confidence than I felt. Up close, I could see the changes 5 years had wrought. Marcus had gray threading through his hairlines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Emma's designer clothes couldn't hide the weight she carried in her shoulders, the defensive set of her jaw. Their children were beautiful, but the older boy had a wariness that made my teacher's heart ache. We stood there, the three of us, in a triangle of shared history and separate presence. The gallery noise faded to a bubble around us party guests flowing past like water around stones. Emma spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper, saying they'd seen a review of my show online, that they'd been visiting Portland for Marcus's work, that they hadn't expected to actually come, but couldn't resist seeing how I was doing. Marcus couldn't stop staring at Lily, who was now showing another child how to hold a brush properly, patience and joy radiating from her small form. When he finally looked at me, his eyes held a question he had no right to ask, and I had no obligation to answer. But the words came anyway, confirmation of what was obvious to anyone who looked closely enough. Yes, she was his. No, he had no claim to her. Yes, I'd chosen this path deliberately. Emma started crying quiet tears that she quickly wiped away, glancing around to see if anyone had noticed. She asked how I could have hidden this, how I could have denied Marcus his child, how I could have been so cruel. The audacity of her accusation after what they'd done almost made me laugh, but I managed to maintain composure, reminding her that they'd made their choice, and I'd made mine, that Lily and I had built a beautiful life without them. Marcus found his voice finally rough with emotion, asking about Lily's name, her birthday, her favorite things, as if he could compress 5 years of absence into a few desperate questions. He said he had rights, that he could have helped, that I'd stolen something precious from him. I reminded him that he'd left me for my sister 3 days after this child was conceived, that he'd chosen his path with full knowledge that consequences existed, even if he hadn't known their specific form. The conversation was attracting attention, guests glancing our way with curiosity and concern. Sarah appeared at my side, Zoe taking Lily to the bathroom, with practiced ease removing her from potential drama. Emma's baby started fussing, and she shifted him awkwardly, this second child, clearly not bringing the joy she'd perhaps expected. Their son tugged at Marcus's sleeve, whining about being bored, wanting to leave, and I saw Marcus's frustration flash across his face before he controlled it. I told them they needed to leave, that this was my night, my triumph, my life. They'd forfeited the right to interrupt. Emma tried once more, stepping toward me with her free hand extended, saying we were sisters, that family should forgive, that the children deserved to know each other. I stepped back, maintaining distance, telling her that DNA didn't make family, that she'd proven that definitively, that my family was here in this gallery, in this city, in this life I'd built from the ashes of what they'd burned. Marcus pulled out his phone, saying he wanted my contact information, that he'd hire lawyers if necessary, that a father had rights regardless of circumstances. I told him to leave before I called security, that any legal action would require explaining to a court why he'd abandoned his pregnant fiancé for her sister, why he'd never once tried to contact me to check if consequences existed from our relationship. His face flushed, but he recognized the threat in my calm tone. They left finally, Emma trying to maintain dignity while wrestling with 2 children, Marcus looking back repeatedly as if Lily might suddenly appear and somehow recognize him. As the door closed behind them, I felt Sarah's hand slip into mine, squeezing gently, reminding me I wasn't alone. The gallery director appeared with champagne, toasting my success, and gradually the evening resumed its celebratory rhythm, though my hands shook for another hour. The weeks following the gallery encounter were filled with a waiting tension, like the pause between lightning and thunder. I consulted a family lawyer who assured me that Marcus's rights were limited by his absence and lack of support, but suggested documenting everything in case he pursued legal action. Lily noticed my distraction, asking why I seemed sad, and I struggled to maintain normalcy while anxiety gnawed at my stability. 6 months passed with no contact from Marcus or Emma, and gradually I stopped checking my email, with dread stopped tensing when unknown numbers called. Life resumed its rhythm of school days and art projects, of Lily's soccer practice and piano lessons, of dinners with Sarah and Zoe, and weekend trips to the coast. I began to believe they'd accepted my boundaries, that seeing Lily hadn't triggered the custody battle I'd feared. Then my mother called on a random Tuesday evening while I was helping Lily with homework. Her voice was different, softer, and somehow older, as she told me Emma and Marcus were divorcing. The fairy tale had crumbled, she said, the stress of 2 children and financial pressure exposing cracks that had always existed. Emma had moved back to Seattle with the children while Marcus relocated to California for a new job. My mother wanted me to know in case I felt ready to reconnect with Emma, who was struggling. I felt nothing at the news, neither satisfaction nor sympathy. Just a hollow recognition that some choices create consequences that ripple indefinitely. Lily looked up from her math worksheet, asking who was on the phone, and I told her it was someone from long ago, no one important now. After she went to bed, I sat in my studio staring at a blank canvas, trying to identify what I felt. Relief, perhaps, that their destruction hadn't required my participation or witness. A year later, at Lily's kindergarten graduation, I met Ryan. He was there for his son Alex, a quiet boy who'd been in Lily's class all year. Ryan was a sculptor who'd moved to Portland after losing his wife to cancer 2 years prior, seeking a fresh start similar to mine, though born from different loss. We started talking at the reception, discovering shared interests in art, single parenting, and rebuilding lives after devastation. Our relationship developed slowly, carefully, both of us protective of our children and suspicious of happiness. Coffee became lunch, became dinner, always with kids present initially, letting them guide the pace of our connection. Lily and Alex bonded over Legos and drawing, creating elaborate worlds together, while Ryan and I talked in his studio or mine, sharing stories of who we'd been before and who we were becoming. Ryan never pressed for details about Lily's father, accepting my explanation that he wasn't in our lives by mutual choice. When Lily asked if Ryan was going to be her dad, he knelt to her level and explained that she could call him whatever felt right, that loving someone didn't require titles or blood, just choosing to show up consistently. She decided on Ryan after a few months, occasionally slipping and calling him Daddy, which made him tear up every time. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony in the Japanese garden, just our children Sarah and Zoe, and a handful of close friends. Lily and Alex served as ring bearers and flower children, simultaneously taking their duties seriously while giggling through the vows. My parents weren't invited, that bridge too damaged to rebuild, though my father sent a card with a check I donated to the school's art program in Lily's name. Our blended family worked in ways I hadn't dared imagine. Ryan adopted Lily officially when she was 8, a legal formality that felt like completion. She knew Ryan wasn't her biological father, and biology had never been what made family in our house. When she eventually asked about her birth father, I told her age-appropriate truth that sometimes adults make choices that hurt others, that she wasn't responsible for adult complications, that she was loved completely by the family we'd chosen and built. The art world embraced my evolving work, which grew more confident and complex as my life stabilized. Ryan and I collaborated on installations that combined his sculptures with my paintings, creating immersive experiences that galleries competed to show. We traveled as a family to exhibitions, Lily and Alex learning that art could be both passion and profession, that creativity was valuable in all its forms. When Lily was 10, she drew a family portrait for a school project. 4 figures stood holding hands against a rainbow background, all smiling, all leaning toward each other. She'd labeled it simply, "My Family." The teacher had asked her to present it to the class, and Lily had apparently explained that families come in all shapes, that hers was built from choice and love, that blood was just one way people connected, but not the only way, or even the best way. Looking at that drawing on our refrigerator, held by magnets from museums we'd visited together, I thought about the path that had brought us here. The pain of betrayal had been a doorway to something I couldn't have imagined while planning a wedding to the wrong person. Emma and Marcus had given me an unexpected gift by choosing each other, forcing me to discover I could choose myself, choose Lily, choose to build rather than simply accept what was offered. Some stories require revenge to feel complete, but mine required only rebirth. The woman who'd stood silent in Emma's apartment, pregnant and abandoned, had transformed into someone who spoke at art conferences, who advocated for single mothers, who showed her daughter that strength could be soft and boundaries could be loving. That transformation was my victory, more satisfying than any confrontation could have been. Lily grew into a remarkable young woman, confident and creative, surrounded by chosen family who celebrated her existence without qualification. When she won her first art competition at 12, the same age I'd been when Emma was born, I thought briefly about cycles and patterns about sisters and choices about roads taken and avoided. Then Lily hugged me, paint still on her hands, and I returned to the present, to the life we'd built, to the family we'd chosen, to the love that had grown from the ashes of betrayal. The story could have ended differently. I could have told Marcus about the pregnancy trapped him in obligation, raised Lily between two households of resentment. I could have forgiven Emma, pretended sisterhood could survive such betrayal, watched my child grow up calling her cousin while knowing the truth. I could have let bitterness consume me, poisoning Lily's childhood with my pain. Instead, I chose silence, distance, and ultimately freedom. That freedom gave me Portland Sarah's friendship, Ryan's love, Alex's brotherly devotion to Lily, and a career that flourished beyond my dreams. It gave Lily a stable, joy-filled childhood, unmarred by adult complications she didn't create. It gave me the space to heal, to grow, to become someone I actually liked, rather than someone trying to meet others' expectations. The price of that freedom was high, but the value of what it purchased was immeasurable. If you've stayed with me through this story, you probably understand something about betrayal, about choosing yourself when others won't choose you, about building beauty from broken pieces. I hope you remember that not every ending needs to be an ending, that sometimes what looks like loss is actually liberation, that the family you choose can be stronger than the family you're born into. Some transformations require complete destruction first, but what grows afterward can be more beautiful than what was lost. Thank you for listening to my journey. If this story resonated with you, if you faced similar betrayals or rebuilt after devastating loss, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about resilience, transformation, and the unexpected gifts that come from life's hardest moments. Share this with someone who might need to hear that starting over is possible, that choosing yourself isn't selfish, that sometimes the best response to betrayal is building a life so beautiful that the past becomes irrelevant. Remember that your story isn't over when someone else chooses to leave. It's just beginning in a way you haven't imagined yet. Until next time, keep choosing yourself, keep building your chosen family, and keep believing that the best chapters might be the ones you never saw coming.